This is Nobody Yet, episode number 11. I'm recording this on February 5th at 6:43 p.m. Okay, so last episode was pretty mumbo jumbo. I listened to it back and honestly, I didn't really know what I was saying, or at least like the ideas that I was trying to express a lot of the times. And that's what you're going to get with these episodes. I feel like my communication is pretty good, and others, like the one last week, my communication is not as solid. And what you see as a result is you kind of see like this variance in communication levels. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down, sometimes it's sideways, but hopefully the overall trend of these episodes goes up. And that's something I'm finding actually pretty cool as I get to record these and actually listen to them over myself and hear myself talk. Is I'm trying to work on communicating clearly, and now hopefully communicating concisely so that I'm able to get my point across to the listener, to you guys, but also to the future me who doesn't have to listen to me mumble all the time, but try to get my point across in the most efficient, colorful, concise, and clear way as possible. So that's something I'm definitely really excited about when it comes to this podcast and really working out really the kinks in my speech and how I talk and how I formulate ideas. Last episode was also a really good example of what I'm like when I'm stressed. And unfortunately, this week I'm still a bit stressed. Stress doesn't just come in weeks, but perhaps in months or in periods in time. And definitely during this era, since joining my new company, has been an area of stress. It's kind of like in the middle of, I no longer get the benefits of being a new joiner. So I can't ask all the very, very, very stupid questions. Not that I have any of those questions anymore, but I no longer have like the no bars, no expectations that I have, at least from my team. Or at least that's what I feel. I'm not actually sure, but is what I feel in myself, which may also not be accurate, but I digress. But I no longer have the safety net of those expectations. And then I also don't have like the safety net of having next to no progress. I'm definitely expected to now output some output given my input and my little accumulated leverage that I have. And the leverage now comes in forms of expertise in terms of old questions that I've asked that I now know the answers to, and just of things that I've done, which now show me that I'm of some worth to the team I'm on. And now I'm hoping to live up to that worth and hopefully elevate myself beyond that worth. So now is definitely a period of stress. Very similarly, when I think to my last job in trading, it was also around this time where I also had that level of stress of when I joined my trading desk. In the first couple of weeks, I didn't really know what I was doing, and the team knew that I didn't really know what I was doing, so there was no expectations. But as I went a little bit further, I established a role, I defined my responsibilities. There was this increasing kind of temperature, if you will. Like if I'm a frog that's being boiled, there's like this increasing temperature that they expect of you to perform at. Now, hopefully dissimilar to the frog that will eventually die from the increasing temperatures, I hopefully won't get boiled over and just perish, but hopefully I'll climb out of the pot or at least get adjusted to the boiling level such that I actually don't die from it, but my body temperature reaches that level and I'm okay. That's a bad continuation on the analogy, but I also digress. So definitely right now is a time of stress. And one thing I like to kind of talk about this week, and I've been thinking a lot about on my walks back home, is kind of my relationship to stress. I feel growing up and in university and in work, I've always saw stress as a really good indicator for growth. And for a lot of times it is. If I take the analogy to many other different places or different contexts, stress is almost a prerequisite for progress. Gymming or fitness is one thing that holds very dear to my heart. And even kind of in the biomechanical level, it makes sense. You have to tear your muscles for it to grow. And of course, there's fuel that you have to feed it. But it's kind of like that constant workout of constantly tearing the muscle fibers for it to grow and for it to get bigger and for it to get stronger. And that, in a source, is stress for the muscle. And that's what you create. Similar to running, back when I ran, it's kind of like pushing the pace of where I found myself to get a little bit faster and a little bit more efficient in my forms and in my running. Very similar when I was playing sports as well. It's very similar when I take up hobbies. When I take up hobbies, it feels like once I become more serious in the hobby, I begin to stress a little bit more because now I actually care about my progress, and I feel a little bit pain when I don't do as good as I thought, or there's like some sort of local minimum failure that I feel. There's some discretion there, but there's some hurt to it, and that hurt causes the stress of that yearn of wanting to improve in this specific task. So I always saw stress as a proxy for growth, and maybe it's another proxy of how high importance do I take this task that I'm currently being stressed by. And I definitely need to remind myself that stress is not always a good proxy for growth. There's so many areas in which stress is very seriously self-induced. Well, all my stress is mostly self-induced, but stress is very much self-induced and actually not required to make very good progress. When I think about my sources of stress, there really comes to like two buckets of it. One is the internal expectations that I have myself, and the second is the need for self-validation for me to believe in my own self-worth. In terms of internal expectations, so I feel like my internal expectations for myself were developed over years of putting some work, seeing some progress, having some achievement. Then there's a reset of the baseline of then putting more work, seeing progress, and then achieving. And then there's a constant resetting of the baseline. So it's kind of like this cycle that continues. And as the cycle continues, or hedonic treadmill, as people like to call it, there is an increasing level of expectations I have for myself of what I'm able to accomplish given the amount of work that I'm able to put in. And I feel like this goes between fields. So if I take my work in university, I studied hard, I got a good grade, and I was able to achieve jobs from those good grades or from that effort. I feel like this transposes to other fields. So in fitness, now I know I'm able to work very hard, like I did in university, to see progress, to eventually get some achievement. Now, this builds kind of that sense for competence. It's the competence to believe that I know I could do these things. Even if it's a field that I have no clue what I'm stepping into, there's kind of like this small belief or the shoulder of belief that, well, if I accomplished all these things in the past that maybe are slightly similar to what I'm trying to accomplish now, but if I accomplished all these things in the past, then that gives me at least some evidence that I should be able to make some progress and hopefully achieve something in the far future in this current thing that I'm trying to push for. So there's that already sense of baked-in expectation that comes with this built-in competence when pursuing a task. Now, competence also stretches in other areas. One is definitely like this aspect of self-discovery. So in part of doing these podcast episodes, I'm able to reflect a lot. Now, I reflect a lot anyways, and I like to think that I know myself well. I'm not sure, since I don't know what I don't know about myself, unfortunately, but I like to think that I know a good bit about myself, given the amount of time I journal, that now I do these podcasts, and I'm able to talk deeply about what I'm thinking and my feelings at specific points in time. So, given that I feel like I'm a little bit more introspective, there is kind of like this, ironically, this underlying pressure of now, I feel like since I'm introspective, I should know the tools needed to actually relieve the stress that I'm experiencing. So kind of in this funny way, by experiencing stress and by knowing the mechanisms, at least for me personally, to relieve the stress, I get more stressed by not applying those mechanisms to relieve stress. So now I'm just kind of like the cycle of I'm more stressed, I can't get rid of the stress, and that results in me being more stressed because I know how to get rid of it and I'm not getting rid of it. So that's kind of like the curse of competence in this side. It's kind of like, if I make a tangent, it's kind of like sleep. If I know how to get good sleep and I don't get good sleep, then all the blame of me not getting good sleep, so that's like, let's say, reducing white light an hour before bed, that's not eating 3 hours before bed, that's not taking fluids 2 hours before bed, it's sleeping in a little bit of a colder environment, it's trying to actively fall asleep while in bed and not just turning around. It's actually trying to remove all the thoughts that I have in bed. But it's all those tools that are associated with falling asleep faster. And if I actually don't apply these tools to actually try to fall asleep, and I do get a night of bad sleep, that means that all the responsibility of the night of bad sleep now falls on my exact shoulders. And maybe in the following nights, as I'm trying to get better sleep, I'm thinking about all the things that I've done to get bad sleep the previous nights, and that gives me more stress about trying to get better sleep, which ironically results in less sleep later on. It results in more bad sleep later on. So this is kind of like the curse of competence in terms of knowing the mechanisms, or maybe not mechanisms psychologically, but mechanisms more in the sense of operationally, what should I do to get out of this situation? Or what I should do to avoid the situation in the first place. But by knowing those things, now the stress becomes even more magnified because I'm not doing it, and I kind of feel guilty of putting myself through this. Not that I needed to be put through this in the first place. So it's kind of like this self-enforcing loop that also occurs when it comes to this area of competence. Now, the second, when it comes to this internal expectations that I touched on before, is this rising baseline of competence, both in terms of introspection, but also in terms of competence in knowing what I know. Now, of course, an offshoot of competence now is skill. So now I know that I have a rising skill level in life in terms of introspection, in terms of operations that I could apply in playbooks I could apply to my life, and also like just technical skills, people skills, social skills, etc. But now, given this rise in overall, hopefully, life baseline, if you will, there's a continuous push that I have to test myself, to test what's possible for me. And I talked about this earlier too, in terms of one of my previous episodes, and what I'm optimizing on. And one of the levers that I'm undoubtedly optimizing myself over is seeing what I'm able to accomplish in my life. And that in itself is very vague, because in what direction am I trying to accomplish? Well, it's kind of like a feeling. It's a feeling of, I want to do what's best, or I want to do the best, and I want to see what my best is. Now, operationally, this is more concrete in fields. For example, in powerlifting, I want to see the most weight I could bench, squat, and deadlift in my life. In terms of running, hopefully I get in running later on once I give up powerlifting, but it's like, how fast can I run 10 kilometers or 10 miles or a marathon, etc., etc. In terms of a career, this becomes a little bit more like dodgy, because there's no specific dimension that I'm really thinking about. I'm not really shooting for a PhD at the best institution, at least not right now. Ironically, I'm also not shooting for like the highest promotion position at my current company or in my previous companies either. That has never really been my goal. Previously, my goals has been accumulating the most net worth as possible, which was through income, investing, etc., etc. But I think that's not necessarily my specific direct goal now. It's kind of more of a passive thing that's in the back of my mind. So then the question is, okay, what does that actually mean to be the best version of myself? And in terms of the career aspect, and I want to generalize career to life, because for me, a career work is very central to my life. It is definitely much more of a feeling. It's a feeling of, when I look back on my day, my week, my months, and my year, it's thinking, did I do the best that I could have done, given my circumstance beginning, given what I knew, and given kind of like the fall of the dice, given the probability that occurred to me over the course of the year? Did I accomplish, did I make progress as far as I did? So with this in mind, there's kind of like that constant push to test myself of, how far can I go? How far can I go until my wheels fall off? I often think about the Greek mythology of Icarus putting on the wings made of wax and feathers, and flying with his father to escape the prison. And there were warnings of his father to not fly too close to the sun, for the sun would melt the wax, and the wax would fall off, and the wings would fall, and Icarus would fall to his death. And lo and behold, Icarus flew too close to the sun, the wax melted, and he fell to his death. And I often think about, what is my equivalent of flying too close to the sun? And the feeling that I talk about in terms of finding what's best for me is finding how close to that sun I could get before, let's say, it all comes crashing down. Or maybe there is some pride in flying to the sun and having it all crash down. Of course, it actually might not crash out in the end. Crashing out might just be a burnout and not necessarily falling out of the sky. But the truth still stands as kind of, how close to the sun can I fly? And that constant pressure that's kind of latent in the back of my mind kind of pushes this constant feeling of, I need to go, I need to go, I need to go. And that's also what builds the stress in these situations or in these settings that are of high importance to me. Because of course, if the thing that I'm working on is not important, even though I'm trying to find the best version of myself, if that thing is not important, I frankly don't care, and I wouldn't have stress. It's kind of like if I were to play pickleball, even though I have this latent pressure of finding what's best for me, I frankly don't care about pickleball. So I won't have a stress of trying to improve pickleball. I'll probably just go and have fun with friends and call it a day. There is no further thought of, I could have like improved my shot, or I could like find a better pickleball form. I don't even know if there are forms, but there isn't that second thought either of like going on YouTube and looking at strategies of how to play pickleball better. There just isn't any of that. I just don't care. So it is the prerequisite of, this is a field that I currently care a lot about. I want to push myself very heavily and find the greatest potential that I have, to realize the greatest potential I have. And the combination of that drives this internal expectation aspect of stress for me. Now, the second aspect of stress I have for myself is the feeling of self-validation. And whereas maybe the internal expectations are a little bit more positive, it's hopefully I like to think of it as a little bit less egotistical. The self-validation part is definitely much more based around having that sense of insecurity. It's me feeling that I'm not good enough for myself. And because I feel I'm not good for myself, it feels like I have to perform in other ways to prove to myself that I deserve the self-worth that I believe I should have. Maybe there's also kind of like that evolutionary psychology aspect of it, of I need to prove my self-worth to other people. But I feel for me, it's definitely much more internalized of, I need to prove it to myself because I think I might be a loser. And I need to prove to myself that I'm certainly not a loser. And by doing so, or in improving myself that I'm not a loser, I need to pursue all these things continuously and improving all the time. So that's where the self-validation comes in. It's definitely proving my self-worth to myself and making myself believe that I'm not a loser. Working off of like that internal expectations, the things that were built from those internal expectations, I feel like I have a story, and this is kind of like a little bit more egotistical. I believe I have a story that I am the person who I believe myself to be. So when I think about this image that I create for myself, or I like to think of myself as, I think about all the work I've done in the past, everything I've accomplished in the past, all the lessons I've learned in the past, all the people I've met in the past, and it's kind of like the combination of all of those kind of gives me that self-identity of who I believe myself to be. It's that self-image, and it's the story I tell myself. From all my past work or progress I've made, and progress, this is not in the past year, but this is like since childhood, since when I was like 14 or something, I could draw from that very clear points of evidence that I know I'm a hard worker. I know that I could accomplish things that I didn't think could be accomplished. I know that I'm pretty stubborn when it comes to grinding, and I could grind hard for a very long time without seeing progress for extended duration. I know that I have a tendency to place more input over output, that I have preference for focusing on how hard I work without thinking about the actual value that I'm getting from it. There's an over-index of I have on work over results. So if this is kind of like the image of like being a hard worker and being diligent and being consistent and persistent and kind of being ruthless to myself in terms of the progress that I want to make, or the input that I want to give, sorry, not the progress, but the input that I want to make. If this is the story that I tell myself, then there feels like there's a certain aspect of validation that I need to actually live up to this story that I have for myself. Now, it's definitely a different debate of whether or not this story is actually the correct story to tell, or whether or not I should actually be telling a story in the first place. But nevertheless, this is the story I tell myself, and I feel like this is a bit like the story I need to put up with. And what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is the putting in headphones and just working straight for like 7 or 8 hours. It's installing Opal on my phone that blocks all social media apps and all distractions for that extended period of time, sometimes 24 hours. It's the I'm no longer going to get lunch with my coworkers, and instead I'm going to work on my desk or eat at my desk and just continuously work, which, if I'm being honest, have been doing for the past like 3 weeks or so. I think partly due to this stress, mainly due to this stress, and perhaps part of the hard worker identity sort of thing that I have for myself. But this is definitely something I did in terms of eating at my desk and working at my trading firm. It's something I did for a very long time. I'm definitely no stranger to this. So it's that precedent of knowing that this is the identity that I have for myself and believing that I need to live up to this identity to myself. It is definitely another conversation of changing that identity, perhaps to be more positive and more productive, if you will, than just, I know myself as a hard worker and I'm going to work hard, and that's it. Now, there is difficulty in actually changing that image because, like anything in precedence, it was reinforced by over years from my life. Believing myself as a hard worker, and my response to stress has always been work harder to eliminate that stress. If that has been my response for the past decade or 2 decades of my life, since applying to university, through university, and in work, then if all those things accumulated to get to where I am today, in a position where I'm actually very happy at what I accomplished, and very grateful for what I've done in my life, what I've done for me in my life, then those have all been aspects of positive reinforcement. It's physical evidence that this thing that I do, this need for self-validation, and the usage of internal expectations that I have for myself, these two things combined have been a very positive force and has worked all my life previously. And if it has worked for all my life previously, why would it not work now? And that's kind of like the reinforcement that I have is like the positive loop that I'm just going to keep doubling down on my bets. It's kind of like, the analogy is kind of like Kanye. If he has always been someone who's been very outspoken, who always went against the social norms, who didn't subscribe to the hip-hop trends, and who was told that nothing would work out ever since he was a producer under Jay-Z's label. When Kanye first wanted to rap, Jay-Z and people just told him no. Like, they kind of laughed, they kind of scoffed at the idea. And then when he wanted to get into fashion, people also kind of laughed in that idea. But if this was always the position that he came from, and he won big over the course of his career by being erratic, by betraying social norms, by being authentically him, and by being a little bit crazy, if I'm being honest, if that's worked for him all his life, why would he not do it now? If he's been positively reinforced in that way, why would he not be crazy, not follow social norms, say whack shit like he does right now? It's kind of like that for me, but in terms of like saying whack shit, it's more in terms of my relationship with work, my relationship with just grinding my ass off, because that's worked all my life. And if that's worked all my life, why would it not work now? So that's kind of like the other aspect of stress of if this has been my response to stress all my time and it's been successful, why would it not be successful now? And that's something that I definitely need to change a bit over the course of the next year or as I get a little bit older, because evidently the body is not the same. The energy level is definitely not the same. And also like just the time commitments are not the same either. And there's definitely much more things that are pulling at my conscience right now than me in high school when I only needed to focus on university and didn't really worry about anything else. So it's this self-validation and that internal expectation for me that really pushes like this idea of I'm so stressed right now. And that's what keeps fueling the fire of my stress, if you will. Recently, at least. Perhaps there's more factors, but these are just the things that kind of immediately bubble to the surface when I think about my stress. And in the first attempts to combat stress, one question I'm actually be thinking a lot about, and I'm trying to implement and trying to operationalize a little bit more, is what would it look like if it was easy? What would work look like if it was easy? What would the gym look like if it was easy? And then the next question for this, or the next step to this is, well, probably to define what easy is. And when I think about easy, I think about goals or things that could be achieved given not that much time input. So let's say I don't need to spend that much time on this task and this task can be done. 2 is flow states that are usually revolve around well-defined objectives. So if I know exactly what I want to achieve and I could work maybe sometimes with my butt off, but I could work specifically for this well-defined objective and achieve that flow state where time just seems to pass. And the third is definitely like a purpose. And there's no cynicism in the pursuit of this goal or in this pursuit of this easy thing. And it's a combination of those things, the thing not taking that much time, being able to define objectives well, enter the flow state, and have a purpose behind achieving that thing. That's what makes something easy. And when I think about the high performers at my previous companies and in school, it seemed like they could do things very easily. Definitely some of that is probably associated with talent. Like they're just much smarter and they know the place much well, or like they know the lay of the land much better than I will. And definitely part of it is also, I also fully don't know how hard they work since everyone works in darkness and no one really knows how hard people work truly. But it seems like they have a much easier time than I do. And perhaps a lot of it does revolve around these 3 things. They don't spend that much time on it. They're able to achieve flow state. And they have kind of that purpose, that drive to actually do the thing. So it doesn't really feel hopeless as they're doing it. So now the question now becomes, okay, how do I find these 3 things with what I do at work? How do I make work easy? Because of course, that's definitely what I want to do. Even though I have great pride from grinding my ass off and feeling the pain and feeling the difficulty of things, and there's a certain pride of doing difficult things, even though I have that, that's not conducive with what I actually want to do, which is I want to see what's most potential for me. And that's something that I need to remember, of course, going forward. But how do I make my work easier? Definitely, the time aspect of it is not spending day and night on what I need to do. Now, for me not to spend day and night on what I need to do, that leads to my second thing of, well, I need to define my objectives much better. What is my ultimate goal in this project I'm trying to work on? Is the goal pushing out features? Or is the goal greater? Like, is it like user acquisition or is it driving revenue? What is the fundamental goal? And by defining the fundamental goal, I can then eliminate what is not needed, and hopefully that reduction in responsibility could help reduce the time commitment that I actually have for this specific task. And it would then crystallize the intermediate objectives more technically, so the actual features I need to push to actually satisfy the overall goal that I have for this project. So it's defining those objectives a little bit better. And once those objectives are defined a little bit better, there's a flow state that could then be achieved. I could go in the office, just work and come out and feel actually pretty good. I might feel kind of cooked, like kind of burnt out, but overall it's kind of like when my head hits the pillow on the ending of the day, I would feel good about the work that I've done. So well-defined objectives would help achieve flow state more. In that sense, it will also help define purpose a little bit better as well. There won't feel like there's like this wallowing cynicism of why am I doing what I'm doing, which I find often is what pops the air out of the balloon. It's what kind of shoots the holes for the sails. It's what causes me to lose steam, is once I start having that cynicism of what's the point of all this? Because once I start asking myself that question, what's the point of all this? I'm no longer swimming downstream, or I'm no longer even swimming in like a stream that's parallel to the floor. I'm now swimming upstream, where my entire conscious is going against my will. So it's maintaining the feeling of purpose and constantly trying to reduce cynicism by focusing on well-defined and meaningful objectives while spending not a flood of time on it. So I could have adequate amount of refresh, repair, and continue to focus in quality time. Now, in times of stress, I can't solve everything. Like I can't just find the root of the stress like it's a turnip or something and just pull it out of the ground. I feel I'm not mature enough to do that at this stage in life, or at least I'm not introspective enough to do that. I feel right now I can only identify that I'm stressed, and I have some levers to try to mitigate that stress. Some levers are a little bit more substantial than others and focus on the root of the problem. Some are a little bit more lighthearted. The levers that are more deep-rooted are harder to pull, though they do yield better results. But they're definitely harder to pull and are not always needed. Sometimes I actually can just grind through the stress, and that's fine. In that case, there's 3 things that are small reminders that I want to remind myself in terms of times of stress. And these are not science-based in any way. These are just things that I find lightens the mood for me a little bit. The first is breathe a little bit deeply, or breathe more deeper. Breathe deeper, not more deeper. Breathe deeper. Try to improve communication skills here. Breathe deeper. I find when I'm stressed, I tend to have more shallow breaths. And as a result of those shallow breaths, it feels like my heart rate elevates. Maybe there's some sort of psychological or like biomechanical, I'm probably not going to use those right words. There's probably something underlying biology here that I'm not sure of. And maybe I might be wrong entirely. But it just feels like my heart beats a little bit quicker. And that drives to a certain level of anxiety. The feeling that I need to do something, but I don't really know what that thing is. And there's like the panic and the stress that's associated with that. So the first reminder I have for myself is breathe deeply. Perhaps meditate a little bit. It doesn't matter if thoughts are still in the mind as you're meditating. Just focus on breath. Focus on breathing deeply and reducing that heart rate. The second one is smile a bit more. I find that when I'm stressed, I tend to put on a face of like no emotion. It's kind of like a mask that I put on, and it's very difficult to read. And I definitely got comments on it before as well, of me walking around the office and having kind of like this face on, kind of like a RBF, if you will, and then people actually commenting on it of, oh yeah, that's actually why we didn't say hi, because we were just kind of like scared, and you look so serious. So it's definitely smile a bit more. It doesn't have to be smiling like as I'm working, but it's like during the small times. It's smiling when I'm cooking or trying to find a laugh. It's smiling a bit more on the subway or on the way back from work, walking back. It's thinking a little bit more, feeling the wind. It's hearing the noises of the streets. It's the small things. Smiling a bit more would help alleviate some of the pressure that I feel, and feeling like the stress that I have is going to kill me. Is remembering that there's more to the world than this thing that I'm focusing on. The third one is sleep a bit more. I find that sleep for me is almost like the single, like if there ever was a silver bullet to my mood, to my stress, to my health, to how I'm feeling physically is most likely that silver bullet is sleep. I find that when I get terrible sleep, which could be a result of sleeping less than I should, so getting 6 hours repeatedly, or it's drinking alcohol, or it's waking up in the middle of the night and failing to go back to sleep, or just waking up and trying to sleep again, which often always makes me wake up groggier, or makes me wake up more tired than I should be. But I always feel like having poor sleep for me has been a source of frustration. It's been a source of this increasing stress, poor mood, which all kind of cycles down to just worse and worse mood, worse progress, which causes more stress, which causes less sleep, so on and so forth, and it kind of devolves. So it's breaking that cycle, putting my foot down, and saying, go sleep. And that's a bit difficult, especially when there's things you need to get done. It's when you're always behind, and when you like life, you like living life, you like being awake. It's hard to tell yourself to go sleep. It's hard to tell yourself to go sleep for the 8 hours because you need it, even though there's so many things you want to keep doing. So breathe deeply, smile a bit more, and sleep a bit more. 3 reminders that I have for myself to subscribe to as I'm a bit stressed during this time, and hopefully for future times of stress. Now, the ultimate solution, probably for me to alleviate this stress and all the future stresses that I will experience, will probably be to let my grip go a little bit. I talked in my last episode that I'm very type A heavy, and what that means is I want to excel at everything all the time. And most certainly that cannot happen, since some things must give. So while I'm still young and I still have the energy and I still have kind of that youthful ambition and the willful ignorance towards perhaps the meaningless in life, if you will, that when you die, nothing really matters. It doesn't really matter if you're a great person or you're a poor person. Nothing really matters because you're dead. But I just need to let go a little bit. Try to alleviate some of the type A by being a little bit more chill and being more type B. I'm definitely very type B on things I don't care about. But I still haven't figured out how to be a little bit more type B in overall life and not grip on everything so hard. But the ultimate solution is definitely just relaxing my grip a little bit. I don't have to control everything. I don't need everything to go well, and I don't need to excel at everything. I just haven't arrived at that point yet, at my current age of 25. I think I will arrive there eventually as I get older and as I get more mature. As I hopefully feel like what I've accomplished has been enough for me. As I have other priorities such as family. I just haven't got there yet. So, as I'm hoping to be on the path of getting in there, just breathe a little deeper, smile a bit more, sleep a bit more. Try to not be that stressed. The final solution to stress for me, and now this is also just repeating all the past reinforcement, the past positive reinforcement that I've had for myself. The other source of stress solution to stress, is to attack the stress, is to eliminate whatever that stress is in front of you. So that's my also reminder to myself. As you think about everything else to resolve your stress, make sure you keep attacking what it is that's in front of you. Because ultimately, it is progress for you that will alleviate what you feel stressed about. Just make sure the stress you're experiencing is not created unnecessarily. Because stress and the amount of input you give is certainly not a good proxy for growth, for your personal growth, for you being more wise, and for you actually getting the outcomes that are definitely wanted on the side, such as money, promotion, things like that. So stress is not a good proxy for measuring what you want. Deal with it, make progress, make sure you keep attacking. Breathe deeply, smile a bit more, sleep a bit more. Let's go. That's it. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope to see you next week when I'm hopefully less stressed, but time will tell. Bye.